welcome. In this exciting session, we have a very prominent guest from UK who has been academically and spiritually spearheading the historical aspect of Vedic studies and Vedic sciences, which applies to all of us. And whether it's a US or UK or anywhere else, Dharma remains constant. It's the most scientific expression of a logical mind. So, without delay, I bring to you Pandit Satish Kumar from UK.
Pranamji, Aditya ji, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a long time and admiring you from a distance. So hopefully we can really make some music or some mischief, depending upon what your standpoint is.
Yeah, any music or mischief is very welcome because Dharma encompasses art and culture too. So it's a good combination.
It does. No, it's a pleasure to be with you.
So on your screen in your back is mentioned British Board of Dharmic Scholars. Is there an official British board which supports Dharmic scholars from the UK government?
There is an official board, and it came out of a need for Hindus, for Dharmic communities to start to contribute in the policy making space for government. So we have a habit of being Dharmic people, which means wherever we go, we settle down, we work in accordance with Dharmic traditions and understanding, and generally thrive and we prosper and we contribute. But when you are surrounded, when you're in a situation where Dharmic ideologies and identities are battling for supremacy, then either you get squeezed out or you start to create boundaries and start to tell people what your expectations and what your understandings are, and really require them to be respected. So we didn't have in the United Kingdom any group of people who were able to articulate the needs of the Dharmic community in a manner which could be understood by the policymakers, by the authorities and people of that sort. So we established the Board of Scholars. Originally it was the British Board of Hindu Scholars when we established it. We launched it in the Parliament buildings behind me, and it was an extremely well-received launch. And since then, we've been doing work in the background, trying to contribute a Dharmic space into policymaking. And we're enjoying a degree of success. We have two gentlemen on board who are from the Sikh tradition, one Jain scholar. We have two Buddhist friends who are also participating and contributing. And we have lots and lots of Hindu scholars. So the key determinant, though, was that we needed them to be established in their understanding of Dharma, and we needed them to be established in their capacity to articulate it using the English language. And so that was the first sort of unique combination that came together. And we are very, very effective now, very effective.
No, you brought very major points here in terms of discussion, that how all the different communities, whether Sikh, Jain, or other allied to Sanatana Dharma, they're also inclusive in this philosophy of Dharma. So
yes, once you know what Dharma is, it's like a multifaceted diamond, isn't it? The diamond is the diamond, but each of its faces has the capacity to reflect an incredible color in its own way and its own manner, without losing the fact that its core identity is still Dharmic. And so we know our Sanatana Dharma, it's infinitely diverse in appearance because it encompasses everything, but its core values are established, they're permanent, they're unchanging, and they are very, very stable and reliable principles. So we're not too concerned with the outer appearance. We're very much concerned, though, with the essence and the Dharmic center of all of these.
Very good, very, very important points you made just now, because as per definition, Dharma means scientific, rational, and scientific in a way that it can be proved through experiential science. And then you said truth, justice. These are different aspects of Dharma. One more thing that strikes me in our discussion just now is the Dharma in instituted like this body is supported by the UK government. So what role, public policy that you mentioned, so what role does Dharma can play in public policy in the UK?
Oh, it's a phenomenal role. It's a desperately needed role. When you think about our British UK Hindu community, we are a tiny percentage of the population. We're just under 2%. And the Hindu community is about 900,000 people. The contribution to GDP is almost 6%. The number of dharmic people, Hindus in the prison population, is the smallest of all. It's 0.013. I think we have 394 people in custodial prison sentences, and most of those are white collar workers or white collar criminals. And so, if you look at that profile, if you could take that profile and extrapolate it and get the whole of the country working with the same ethos and the same principles, the change would be phenomenal. We would see a 300% increase in GDP. We would see a reduction of about 90% in terms of the prison population. Massive changes. How do we tell the domestic host population that this is how we do things? They want the whole country to be as prosperous as we are, as tranquil as we are, as community-oriented and seva-centered as we are, as family-based as we are. So how do we tell them that without being able to tell it to them in their language and contributing it into the policy-making space? So the need is enormous, the potential is enormous, and the challenges are also enormous because there are obviously established power centers and structures who will be really unhappy if our ideologies and understandings supersede theirs and theirs become obsolete. So the tension is always there. There is always resistance, but we have the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and we are really making that apparent in front of people when we present to them. So there's a huge scope, and from a dharmic philosophical point of view, if we don't teach them, who else is? Dharma is one of those understandings. It's been refined over what, as Nilesh Okji has really proven, we have at least 17,000 years of continuous civilization. And over 17,000 years, humanity learns an awful lot about the way the world works, the way we work. How does it all fit together? And so we've refined this understanding. And yet we've been transplanted into a civilization. They call it a civilization, but it's really in the early stages of becoming civilized, which is less than 1,500 years old. And so if we are not going to give them the benefit of 17,000 years of continuous human experimentation, experience, exploration, and say, here's what we've learned, and it's the proof of the pudding is in the success we enjoy everywhere, then that's our negligence. We really have a duty to do this now. And I think it's taken probably about 40 or 50 years for our community to become really fluent in the language within which this has to be expressed, whether we like it or this Kurukshetra where we're operating in, the language it speaks is English. And so we have to become masterful now in sharing what we know and doing it skillfully in the same way that an elder grandfather would try and convey his knowledge to a delinquent adolescent. We have to do it with as much care and as much sensitivity.
Very good points. Very important observations you had. Now, in US, the one of the things is US is a very new country, around 300 years or so. 1779 onwards is 1776 onwards is what US started to come in existence, and there have been severe strifes with the natives because 1492 Columbus discovered Cat Islands in Bahamas, and virtually the entire populations of Native Americans from north and south, they perished, I would say, and only 5 million natives left. For them, the history of America is different. Their history of America matches with the Vedic timelines. When they say that we came here 77,000 years back or 100,000 years back, Now, their history relevance is very different than the
It is.
European settlers. For them, the history begins from Spain or Portugal or UK to large extent. And America got independence from UK. So in a way, Britain and India have the same history in one way or the other. In one ways, they both got independence from the British. But the culturally, the history of the natives in America has been wiped out. I mean, the natives of America have no churches, nothing. They live in reservations. They still cannot live in the cities and practice their own faith because the church won't let them function. And in India, the natives, I would say the Hindus, are facing the same issue of attacks by the, to completely put them into the museums. In America, the
Completely.
natives are in the museum right now. And in India, also the natives
Yeah.
are being attacked by the same culture to go into the museums. So do you think that the in India also the history might repeat that the natives are gone if Sanatana Dharma is not stronger there?
So there are so many wonderful little ideas that you've put into so few sentences. And I think the time has come for us older civilizations to look at this stumbling teenage civilization and understand what its potential is, but also the threat that it poses to itself, to all of the other civilizations, and indeed the planet. Okay, there is a very, very real issue here. Now, the the issue is one of organic civilization. You've mentioned the 77,000-year-old indigenous population of the Americas, and similar sort of timeline applies to the civilization over in Australia. And I said 17,000 because no European scholar can dispute the evidence that, for example, Sri Aupji has put together, which irrefutably establishes that it's at least 17,000 years. So if you take all of those civilizations together, they had a certain way of living. And that certain way of living was dharmic. And I don't mean dharmic by label, I mean dharmic by essence. And that essence is that I learn lessons using reason and using compassion. And I explore the world around me and how it functions. And the lessons that I learn, I then pass those lessons on to the next generation. And they build on it and they build on it. And so you have this beautiful tree growing with unbelievably valuable lessons that have been passed on. This is an organic growth. Now that's how the civilization and dharmic evolution of humanity works. But the way the European civilization has worked is that it grew a tiny bit, but when their hearts and their emotions were still aggressive, they took what little they had learned. They didn't have the wherewithal to understand what other civilizations were about, and they took their tiny little belief-based system and started to replace it everywhere else. So they started to cut down these beautiful trees, these civilizational trees, and graft onto the stump that was left their tiny little stub of a belief civilization. Now, emotionally and spiritually, we know that when a person has no spiritual evolution, they're violent, they're barbaric, they're stuck with their sensory stimulation, they're fearful, which is why they are bullies and they attack. In order to fill the gap created by fear inside of them, they turn outwards and try and remove every perceived threat. Can you imagine the position that they're in now? Okay, so they have built a Euro-Christian civilization. Okay, they built it on violence. They destroyed all the wise women throughout the European Mediterranean area by calling them witches. And I don't know if your listeners, viewers will know, but in England, there was actually an official post called the Witch Finder General. And his job was to go and find the women, claim they were witches, and deprive them of life, power, authority, so that the church's power could not be challenged. The church was running around with this little book of beliefs, and they had to use force to defeat reason because they didn't have wisdom on their side. And now what's happened They've been selling this little belief all around the world, and the world suffered as a result. And you mentioned Columbus discovered. The very word discovery has a legal and a religious meaning to it. The original use of the word discovery was that if a Christian went to any land and there were no Christians there, he could assume that he owned it. And he owned everybody and everything else on that piece of land. That's what discovery actually means. So Columbus discovered that whole continent. And suddenly, because there were no Christians, hey guys, it's all mine. Okay? So this Euro-Christian civilization is a very emotionally and intellectually fragile construct. And it's now being challenged internally and externally. And you mentioned the Americas. In North America, in Canada, the Anglican Church issued a full and comprehensive apology to the Native Americans for what they had done to their children by stealing their children and trying to make them carbon copies of themselves. If your viewers go out onto the internet and just do a search on Google of Anglican Apology Canada, you will see what an incredible apology it is. But this is par for the course for barbarians. What they do is they destroy everything, and when there's a tiny little bit left that can't stand up and can't rejuvenate itself, they're happy to then apologize and say, we're really sorry for having destroyed your 70, 80,000 year old civilization, but hey, please come and join our church. The apology, the disingenuous apology, it's a fraudulent apology, it's a shameless apology, but that's what they have done. Now, we have no choice, because this civilization, the way it's functioning, is if it's successful in eradicating dharmic or organically grown, evolved civilizations which live happily with the world and with creatures, it would destroy itself. It is engaged in the destruction of its own supply chains, as well as the very, very supply chains that support humanity. So it's up to us to do this. And as a dharmic community, the Sanatani community are actually the ones who are the most responsible for acting now, right? Because we are the only civilization which still has got a living, vibrant connection with our teachings. The North American Indians, as you've said, though 100 million, I think the population was, of natives who lived in that piece of land and have been living there in harmony. Dharma means harmony. The closest word in the English language to dharma is actually probably harmony, as opposed to religion or anything else like that. It has the bhavna of what dharma means, as well as the intellectual idea of what dharma means. And yet they arrived there and completely destroyed a colossally well-integrated, well-established human civilization. So they can't do it. I have friends who are Native Americans, and their pain you can almost feel from over here in the Atlantic. They can't do this. They don't have the momentum left. We still have the momentum. The only thing that's required is for members of our tradition to do enough sadhana to become fearless of consequence.
That's right.
Now, this is a challenge for us because we are also, our foreheads were ground into the dust by the British. And then prior to that, we had the Arabian colonizers who wanted to stuff their Arabic ideology and identity into our heads, and it just didn't make sense to us. So they also used violence. So we've had two waves of violence which we've survived, and now we need to take Krishnji at his word, what he teaches us in the Gita, right, about Atma being Amar, and this just being clothing. If this is true, and we realize it, then we should be fearless. And if you imagine a handful of fearless Sanatanis recognizing their immortality, we should be able to make the change and restore harmony to the whole of humanity as well as the earth, and that's our responsibility to do it. Very few others have the civilizational momentum to do this. So it's up to you and I.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I just want to continue on this Native American history.
Mm.
So Native American history, as you just said, they were in complete harmony with the nature, and they had meditational practices which very closely resemble us. You know, something like known as sweat lodges. Sweat lodges is a soul's connection to Mother Earth, and that was the whole theme behind it.
Gee.
The methods may be different, but their process was right. Now, another thing, very funny thing also. In 1924, American government gave them American citizenship.
Oh, the cheek of it.
So this is and Brazilian government, which virtually wiped out everything in Brazil. In fact, the only thing which Brazil knows is the Portuguese church and the
Yeah.
Pope. Portuguese church head was their ancestor. Now, can you just imagine that a person who is totally brown and dark, and you have this European, his the ancestor. So like they've completely removed the history. So the way the colonization happened is brainwashing. I call it brainwashing of generations. Like in Mexico, I can give you another example. It's the same thing. Incas, Aztecs, Mayans, and they are the ones who are connected to different tribes. Sioux tribe is the biggest in North America, and they're all connected. And they all worship the same pantheon that we worship. They worship sun, moon, wind, and they
And
worship
Mother Earth, and Mother
Mother
Earth as a feminine.
as a feminine, and they're very closely connected to those roots.
They
And
are
the church wiped completely out. Even today, 1924, they got their citizenship, but the discrimination against them continued until last Obama term. Obama actually put a line through their territory, and then after putting the line, they gave them money, and out of their protest, when the protest happened, they stopped the plan project. And but actually, they are already made the inroads. So this is continuing till date, and the suffering. I call them Native Americans as a dharmic community of North America,
completely.
because they are the natives. They were living on this land. Their ancestors populated this land. And if you go to different cities in North America, Moundsville in West Virginia, there are mounds of their graveyards. That's why the city is called Moundsville. So many graves are buried there. It's called Moundsville. Now, will if the Dharmic people don't come together in UK and US, whether they are from India or Fiji, or in US they are from Africa, we have the same fate waiting for us if we don't wake up now. Because history repeats itself if the defenders are not aware. And so, what steps do we have to take, Panditji, that we move
So,
on to?
so let me give you a very real example. Here in the United Kingdom, it's a tiny country, okay, and but it's the country which formed the identity, which covered the vast majority of civilized humanity for a long period of time. The British Empire, you must remember Tagore saying, what did he say? The sun never sets on the British Empire. I think that used to be a common saying, and then Tagore said the reason the sun never sets on the British Empire is because not even God could trust the British in the dark. And so they put their identity in so many places. So England, it still has a very colonialist, imperial Britishness about it here. And we here as a Hindu community, we've been here now probably 3 generations. And so we have had to battle against. We are like, our sadhana is like the sadhana of Vibhishan. Okay, we live in Lanka, which is ruled by asurs and rakshasas and everything else. From our perspective, the ideology is violent, it's aggressive, it's competitive, it's combative, it's adversarial, everything is that way. It's not like us. We're collaborative creatures, we integrate with the earth and the planets and everything else. And so we have had to learn that actually in order to survive and thrive here, we need to make those changes into the community here. And so for the last 3 generations, we have been rising this island. Now they hate me saying it, but we have taught them how to eat food. London has more Indian restaurants now than any other, even New Delhi. It's a crazy figure. So we have taught them about how food should be consumed in order to give pran shakti to the body, to not to overstimulate it, but to help it become tranquil, to nourish it without excesses. We've taught them so many other things, meditation, yoga. We're quietly civilizing the savage beast. And this identity is now becoming a little bit more introspective. in Britain, they proudly say, we have got the best equalities legislation in the world. And when it was a government minister, when he made that speech afterwards, I responded to him and I said, well, the reason you've got the best equalities legislation in the world was for our protection, right? It's because we were here. We weren't oppressing you guys. Right? You were oppressing people who look and talk like me and my ancestors, and well, not so much me because I've been here too long, but aliens, and they were being oppressed by the British. You know, there was so much violence against us. I grew up in a Catholic church, a Catholic boys' school of 400 Catholic boys, white, and there were only 4 of us who were non-white. We were being beaten up, and we were fighting and beating them up every week for the best part of 5 or 6 years, just because we were different. We were an alien species, and they hated us. So we have had to fight back to that point where now we're at that tipping point. We're making a big contribution to the community here and beginning to understand it. But it has been a huge sacrifice. And this sacrifice requires, like I said, you have to do sadhana. It's only sadhana which will enable you to act intuitively in accordance with, you know, Krishnaji says, he says, Yatha ichasi tatha kuru. He doesn't say that to Arjun right at the beginning of the Gita, he says it at the end of the Gita, when he's explained everything and Arjun has become a bit more self-realized and is then courageous enough. Because the battle is huge, but we have to do this. And this is really why we exist. This is the real reason why we now have got footholds all over the world. If you think of humanity like blood cells, you know, we're the white blood cells of the earth. Right? Our job is to go to different parts and actually rejuvenate, to heal, to repair, and to bring health and well-being to those places. But we can't do that if we're still, one, colonized mentally. We have to decolonize ourselves first, and sadhana helps brilliantly to decolonize. And then we have to become fearless. We have to become confident enough to be able to say, guys, you are new kids on the block. You're making mistakes. You're destroying the earth to a degree which no other civilization has done. And we have to be able to do that confidently and competently. And that's what we're doing. And you mentioned the Americans. I have got some very good friends who are in the native North American community. And we've started something. I don't know if you know, but you know how we are Indians, and they are also called Indians.
That's right.
And in order to distinguish between the two, do you know what the Native Americans call us?
No.
They call us dot Indians, and they call themselves feather Indians. Okay, so I've started this little initiative. It's right at the beginning, and we're calling it Dot Feather Dialogues. Okay,
that's interesting.
Because you have to nurture them as well. They are a dharmic community. They're a dharmic people, and they are gentle, and they are subtle, and they are sensitive, and they have really suffered almost on exactly the same scale as we suffered in India. Right? They suffered from one wave of colonizers who were brutal, and we suffered 2 waves for 4 times as long, but we still have got a degree of civilizational momentum. So it's part of our expansion, part of our resurgence is to help them to get up on their feet and also recognize that their indigenous civilization was of a much greater value to the earth and humanity than this barbarianization, which is masquerading as a civilization, but is far from civilized yet.
See, the word Indian has a pejorative context, and in many ways in America, I can tell you, because Indian word was used by the British to show somebody as barbaric, uneducated, illiterate, or lowest of the lowest mankind. That was the word used Indian for. So when they say India, it's a Christian term of calling someone backward. And so in America, the term that they use is Native Americans.
That's
And
correct.
Native Americans, and also in Brazilian also now, instead of calling Native Indians, they call themselves Native Brazilians, Native Mexicans. So that has started. And somewhere down the line, church has gained a very negative repute uh, in Mexico. because there is a story called Juan Diego, the one Lady of Guadalupe, the Church of Lady of Guadalupe, which was an old um, uh, Mayan deity, similar to Durga, with the power of getting rains and progeny and miracle. So they invented the story of a man called Juan Diego. Juan Diego is similar to an American, somebody calling uh, John Doe,
Yeah,
John Doe in
yeah.
US. Exactly, Juan Diego, John Doe, Juan Diego. In India, we call them Ram Bharose. It's a it's a mentally
Wonderful.
it's a mentally created term. So icons, it's like a fakery at the best. They created fake symbols, fake histories, fake and force it. If you don't follow it, you might be murdered, and that continued till recent times. Now, with the social media and everything coming back, the reservations in US, they're rising up. So we have a great outreach to all the reservations near San Diego and
Brilliant.
also in the Mid East, in the Mid East part of the US, Midwest. So in a way, dharma is coming back. Dharma, like you said, it's natural. It's nothing to do, no artificial imposition. It's like clear water. So when you remove the colors from the water, it becomes water again. And
Precisely.
same way, just you throw out these Abrahamic mindsets, then again it's back to normal.
Yeah,
So
you will
now,
see.
go
So I
ahead.
was just going to say, you mentioned Dharma is coming back in 2013, which is when I got actively involved in public life and participating in the national scene. I created the Twitter handle Dharma Rising. And up until that time in the United Kingdom, nobody had thought, what does that mean? What does Dharma Rising mean? But now, suddenly it's a movement, and everybody is feeling that Dharma is genuinely rising. There is one thing you mentioned there which really sparked up an important thought that I just wanted to share, and that was that you mentioned fakery. Okay, now from the dharmic perspective, I think it's safe to say that religion is fake spirituality.
That's right.
Now, that's a very powerful statement, but yet it is true. Religion is fake spirituality, and there is no way that you can make something fake into something authentic because it's a lie. It's an untruth. It doesn't survive. It doesn't last the test of time and human scrutiny. And this is what we're seeing. We're seeing these empires that were built on fake spirituality, right, suddenly crumble. Internally, they're becoming corrupted and be riddled with all sorts of unpleasantness, and the impact they've had on humanity is a massive impact. And so I think the more we promote the idea that religion is fake spirituality, the greater a service we're going to be doing to everyone. Can you imagine a world with no clerics?
Oh, so safe. Children will
Wow,
be safe.
what a world that would be, right?
That's right.
And our swamis are not clerics because they're not part of any institution which
Correct.
is claiming a monopoly. Whereas a cleric is part of a religious institution, i.e., an institution based on fake spirituality, right? And he is claiming a monopoly. Imagine a world where we had no clerics. It would be a huge leap forward for humanity, and we have to usher that leap forward in.
Last year, I visited Vatican, and I can tell you, I went to Pantheon and I went to many places. And I was in Vatican. I had a special permit, and I could only see stories of horror. It was
Yeah.
like it's like the British. You have the Tower of London. Same story, similar stories. The horrible stories of violence across the Vatican and the scheming, and uh, and I genuinely see that's the reason why Christianity and other Abrahamic faiths are losing popularity in North America and South America. I can tell for sure because of the
Yeah.
inherent barbarity built into the history. That brings me to another point, uh, and we will cover in detail in other shows. But in this show, we'll conclude with that point. For any culture to sustain, we need historical symbols in that land. For UK, the symbols are the Stonehenge in Salisbury and some other constructions in Wales and some pre-Christian areas in Ireland and Scotland. And
Yes.
so Has that been your focus anytime in the past?
The British Hindu community have actually got a wonderful relationship with they're called the pagans in this country, but they are the indigenous, organic, spiritual civilization that was here. You know, it's worth drawing a distinction in that in these islands there are the English, there are the Scottish, there are the Welsh, and there are the Irish. And so the British is actually the colonial identity. The British are the people who used force and violence to dominate all of those four groups. And in fact, you can trace them to a tribe in Germany called the Angles. And that's where England has come from, and everyone. So a very violent tribe came here, colonized this country, and created over a period of time the British identity. But the pagan identity is still there. And in Ireland, you see this very, very strong. They're very much still connected with their traditions, their culture, their songs, their music. And then on the surface, there is a thin veneer of Christian, sort of violently imposed ideas. And slowly, that's beginning to change. But the violence that you've said, I think people should also understand that the Church of England was not established by a saint. It was not established on a religious basis. It was established because Henry VIII wanted to marry another one of his 6 wives. The Roman Catholic Church said, no, we're not going to let you do it. So he said, okay, I'm going to create my own church. So the Church of England was established by a person who was not very spiritual. And it's known. I've visited Lambeth Palace, which is the headquarters, and there's a gallery there, and they're all the archbishops. And the current archbishop was showing us, was saying, he was a rapist, he was a murderer, he was a thief, and all of the, it's a genuine rogues gallery. So you're right, this is a tradition which built its authority on violence. And that authority is now crumbling because it's seeing the light of day. And we have to put into place an alternative. I've taught in Ireland, which is a staunchly Catholic country, and I taught them that in our tradition, we say that any human being who introverts and masters some degree of silence naturally becomes spiritual. That's all you have to do. You don't need an institution which has got a book and drives it into you. You can start with your own life where you are, go inwards, become silent, and see what happens. And more people are now doing it. And the institutions are definitely worried. You mentioned the missionaries. You know, the missionaries, they want Hindus without Hinduism, but they want Hinduism, all of the knowledge, but without Hindus. So they want to separate both and grab hold of both and internalize both. And this is what they're engaged in. But we have worked out what that trick is, and there are enough people now who are saying, sorry, no, we're not going to do that. Courage is what's called for, and courage is rising. Dharma is rising.
See, Christians and I don't take other communities' name; they're not important to us. But mostly, I can say the Vatican is always looking for an identity, whether it's a Portuguese church or Spanish church, or in America you have Mormons, you have thousands of churches you have. All of them are searching their identity for so long, and we are the only people who know our identity. I think that's a big difference between us and them. You know, I
Massive,
can always,
massive.
yeah, I can always say Darwin's father was a monkey. Why not? I know my father. So our identity is made by the great sages and other people. We already know. We don't have to.
Absolutely.
When somebody asks me like, what is your racial background? I said 100% gold standard Indian from India. 100% gold standard. I said no mixture of 2% French, 1% Japanese, 1% German. And it's like it looks like a dog's breed. But anyway, it is a fantastic discussion with you, Satish ji, and it's a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Aditya ji.
Do you have
I
any
think
closing words?
we could talk for a long time. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity for closing words. The only thing I'd share with your viewers is one small thing, and that is to remember that Hanumanji did not know how powerful he was until somebody reminded him of what his true identity is. And once he remembered, he was able to leap across oceans and defeat Rakshasas and restore Sita to Ramchandraji. And so that's what our situation is. We have to remember who we are. We have to do the sadhana. We have to embody it, become courageous, and the earth will thank us for our seva. That's really the need of the hour. And conversations like this contribute towards it. So thank you very much for the opportunity to play around with the minds of your watchers. It's been a pleasure for me, and I hope they've also found it entertaining and amusing as well. So thank you very much, Aditya ji.
Thank you. Namaskar and thank you.
Namaskar ji. Pranam, pranam.